Hello there. Welcome to another episode of What Would Aristotle Do? I must admit that when I started writing the script for this episode, AndyBurnham hadn't even declared that he was going to run as the candidate for Makerfield, and by the time I finished it, he would still not been elected as an MP. Nevertheless, I feel that it's still relevant, and so here we go. Those of you who follow United Kingdom politics will know that we are about to have yet another change in Prime Minister, making it 7 in the last 10 years. As a completely unqualified person, I nevertheless feel that I am competent to create a successful manifesto where the last 6 Prime Ministers have failed. How? By the application of virtue ethics. AndyBurnham has just won a by-election, which gets him back into the UK Parliament. From there, everyone assumes that he will challenge Keir Starmer, the current Prime Minister, for leadership of the Labour Party. If he wins, he will also become Prime Minister of the whole country. It's a bit of a weird process if you think about it, but hey, that comes of having an unwritten constitution. The only people who will get a vote on this will be Labour Party members of Parliament and then members of the Labour Party itself. AndyBurnham's political philosophy goes by the name of Manchesterism. For those of you who don't follow UK politics, Burnham was, until very recently, the mayor of Greater Manchester and, unusually for a politician, was and still is popular there. Manchesterism hasn't really been spelt out by either Burnham or his acolytes, so there have been a number of attempts to reverse engineer it from what Burnham has said at various times, and by looking at what he has actually done in Manchester. I'm going to rely on the TLDR version that I will link to. According to TLDR, Manchesterism consists of 3 pillars. These are place-first politics, deeper devolution, and more public investment. Let's check, though, whether this aligns with what people's concerns are. Polling before the last elections in May, which were for various local councils in England, plus the Welsh Senedd and the Scottish Government, identified the following as the top issues that concern people today. 1. The state of the roads. 2. The economy and the cost of living. 3. The state of the National Health Service. And 4. Immigration. Now, I have quite a bit of experience of delivering difficult things, and normally practical wisdom would suggest that the best approach would be to pick the top 3 things and focus all your attention on them. In this case, however, immigration is the number 1 issue for about 1/3 of the electorate, so I think it would be necessary to handle this properly, otherwise the noise from this issue would drown out everything else. So, how does Manchesterism match up with the concerns of UK citizens? Well, you could make a link between place first and the state of the roads. However, my understanding is that when Burnham talks about place first, what he means is working across the political divide to improve things for people no matter who they voted for. This is at least an alternative to Reform's threat of putting asylum seekers in wards that voted Green, which is, if anything, the opposite of place first. More devolution does not per se address any of the voters' concerns. It's one of those wonky structural things like electoral reform that people who are into politics bang on about all the time, but the general population doesn't really care about. If you go to the streets of Bolton or Wigan, which are satellite towns within the Greater Manchester area, people will complain that those people down in that London don't understand what it's like for people in the north. However, they also complain that people in central Manchester don't understand the problems of towns like theirs. So it's clear that the problem is that the wrong decisions are being made rather than what city they are being made in. More public investment is always good, but it's susceptible to arguments about whether we can afford it. The other person who has said they will run is the former Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, who is already an MP, so didn't have to go through qualifying. The other day I heard an interview with Streeting on the excellent New Statesman podcast. Streeting says that his driving purpose is to make sure that kids from working class backgrounds like his have the same choices and chances and security and opportunity as those from the most privileged background. Okay, so if we hark back to my previous video on practical wisdom, we've got a vision. It is a single sentence which is easy to understand. Now, Conservatives might argue that this is the politics of envy. The reason that kids from working class backgrounds do not have these things is that their parents haven't worked hard enough. But I guess that the majority of people in the UK would agree that this world would be better than the one that we live in the moment. So, once again, let's check this against people's top concerns. Straight away, you can see that Streeting has a problem. His vision does not obviously have anything to do with the four things that are at the top of people's minds when considering what's wrong with the UK. He could explain how his vision links to these issues, but as Ronald Reagan said, if you're explaining, you're losing. Another thing that Streeting talks about a lot is the need to listen to backbenchers, and indeed cabinet MPs, and take on more of their ideas. Now, I remember an old boss of mine saying that ideas were the easiest part of the job. What is hard is making those ideas a reality. I'll talk more about this when I outline my solution to all this, which neatly brings me on to my solution. The problem with both Burnham and Streeting's approach is that they don't acknowledge the everyday reality that people live with. Effectively, they're saying, I know that you think that these are the problems we should be dealing with. Actually, the real problems are these other things. Now, this is basically gaslighting. So let's use the vision, outcomes, plan approach that I laid out in the last video, where I talked about practical wisdom. We've got stuff that people care about. Let's see if we can forge a set of outcomes that meet these concerns. Starting with the roads. It would be easy to say, let's fix X number of potholes per year, where X is enough to get rid of the backlog in 5 years. But that's not really what we want. What we actually want is roads that don't have potholes. So a better way of doing this would be to set a target of X potholes per mile of road in 5 years' time, where X is a much smaller number than it is now. Let's take this quite specific outcome and see if we can work it up into a vision. So the vision is for a country where people can be proud of the place where they live, because it looks nice and is maintained in good condition. That way, once we have fixed the roads, we can move on to other stuff like parks, schools, whatever comes highest in the public consciousness once they no longer have to worry about the roads. Secondly, the economy and the cost of living. Why are people worried about this? Well, I think it's because they are struggling to pay the bills. What can we do about that? Well, you may have heard of the real living wage. That's based on something called the minimum income standard, which is basically the amount of money required to have a decent life, including going out once in a while and having a holiday once a year. I think that's what it is. So what we need to do is get everyone in the country up to the minimum income standard. Now, on top of that, I remember hearing that you should have 3 months' worth of savings so that you can afford to cover unexpected bills or not being able to work for some reason. The minimum income standard is an income after taxes of £470 per month for a single adult and £1,250 for a couple with 2 kids. This would mean that you would need just over £1,400 in savings as a single person, rising to £3,750 for a family of 4. Clearly, there are 2 ways of doing this. You can either increase income, which could be a combination of wages and benefits, or you can reduce the cost of things. Most likely, you would want to do a combination of the 2. So that's our vision. Get everyone in the UK up to a standard of living where they're not worried about day-to-day cost of living and they can even afford to go out and enjoy life. Thirdly, the NHS. People are worried that they won't get seen quickly enough when they need it. And in a way, the target for this is pretty easy to define. All we need to do is get the NHS back to where it was in the mid-2000s. Actually doing that is a different matter. So our vision is to get the NHS to a stage where people are confident that they will get the treatment they need in a reasonable timescale. Lastly, immigration. If I were Prime Minister, I wouldn't talk at all about the benefits and drawbacks of immigration, either people coming here for work or for sanctuary. From talking to people who live in the areas affected by asylum seekers, the issue seems to be that a load of young men who don't speak English suddenly turn up in small towns and are housed in hotels which used to be used by the locals for weddings and Christmas parties and have now been taken over by large corporations. All of this happens without any consultation or even communication with the locals. This has to stop, and as quickly as possible. Secondly, I think that everyone can agree that a system that takes years to determine whether an asylum seeker can get leave to remain lacks humanity. Speeding up the rate of processing cases has to be a priority so asylum seekers can get jobs and pay for their own food and accommodation. Thirdly, small boats. The reason asylum seekers come over on small boats is that there are almost no legal ways for asylum seekers to get to the UK. Even for parts of the world where there are schemes, like Afghanistan, it's so dangerous to access the official routes that they might as well not exist. So what's the vision here? I'd say an asylum seeker that is humane and gives shelter to people who need it, allows asylum seekers to contribute to the UK as soon as possible and doesn't upset the balance of local communities. Lastly, for the small number of asylum seekers who are refused permission to stay in the UK, the current systems that are in place don't work well. This clearly needs sorting out. So, we have our 4 visions. A country where people live in a nice place that they are proud of, where people can afford a treat and a holiday and are not worried that one unexpected bill will push them into poverty, where people feel confident that, should they fall ill or suffer injury, they will get the treatment they need in a reasonable timescale. An asylum system that is fair, fast, doesn't foist large numbers of young people onto towns without their consent, and allows legitimate asylum seekers to start contributing to the economy as soon as possible. Now, all politicians and all journalists talk about the policy changes they want to make. They also talk about the structural changes they want to make, creating a new department, merging 2 others, getting rid of another. None of them talk about how change is actually going to be delivered. Now, for most of my working life, I've been in the business of delivering stuff. That is, actually getting things done. I've done this in the private sector, that is, for businesses that are supposed to make money. And I've also done this in the public sector for both central and local government and for publicly funded bodies. Not to blow my own trumpet, but for the three most difficult things I've done, I've been told that no one else could have been successful. So I think that I can say with some certainty that I know what it takes to deliver difficult things. In my time, I've managed, worked for and alongside well over 100 project managers, program managers and other assorted job titles that were responsible for getting stuff done. These are roles that require masses of practical wisdom. And if you don't know what that is, you can pause this video now and watch my previous one, all about the intellectual virtues and practical wisdom. Now, I would say that out of those 100 plus people, less than 10 had enough of the skills, knowledge and wisdom to really deliver hard things. Of the rest, maybe 20% were good enough to deliver something moderately difficult without support, and another 30% were capable of delivering if they were working for a really capable leader. The rest, I'm afraid to say, did not have the skills to do the job and really should have been doing something else. Now, this is not a particular problem of the public sector. I have encountered just as many highly paid project managers in the private sector who would have struggled to competently stack shelves in a supermarket, a job I've also done, by the way. The public sector has an additional problem in that it tends to apply rigid rules about what people should be paid, which set a rate for the role rather than the person hired. However, in my experience, there are some people who will, at least for a while, do a job because of the challenge, and indeed because of the satisfaction of achieving real change for actual people. If a public sector body can attract one of these people, they can thank their lucky stars and enjoy their commitment while they are there. Given that delivering real change on the 4 priorities is going to involve doing hard stuff, and given that less than 10% of people currently in this type of delivery role are actually capable of delivering this kind of stuff, what's the new UK Prime Minister to do? Firstly, he or she needs to have access to people who can figure out who's good and who isn't. There are a lot of people who can talk a good game in interview, but if you are one of the people who has done hard things yourself, then it only takes a 15-minute conversation to sort out the real deal from the bullshitter. As PM, hopefully you will know at least one person who has this experience and get them to screen your candidates. Once you have people in place, you can start moving. For each of the 4 priorities, you've got your vision. You've also got a few key outcomes you want to see. Give these to your head delivery people and tell them to come back with more fully fleshed out outcomes, a plan for delivery which includes real milestones for things getting better, a rough order of magnitude of idea of what it will cost and how many people will be needed. I'd expect a person of the caliber needed to be able to do this in a couple of months. If it takes them more than 3, then they're the wrong person for the job and I would get rid of them. I'd also expect them to be asking lots of questions and testing their understanding, both with the PM and with lots of other people. A word on what I'd expect from the plans. The milestones need to be tangible results that people can see. For example, for the elimination of potholes from the roads, the first milestone should be something like 100 miles of road now pothole free. All too often you see milestones like tender document issued to suppliers. Now, depending on how you tackle the problem, That might be an internal milestone that you need to track, but the only milestones that you should be reporting on are the ones that count, which are the results that people can see. Once the plans are agreed and the budget signed off, I would insist that each of the delivery leads reports on progress against milestones in public every week. When, not if, because this is what always happens, things start to go off track, I would expect that the delivery leads would be able to say, firstly, what they were doing to correct things, and secondly, when they expect the milestone now to be delivered, and the knock-on effect on future milestones. Anyone who is unable to do this would have to be replaced. People might say that this way of working would be a distraction from the real business of government. To me, the foundation of democracy is that you listen to and care about what voters' concerns actually are. If we take the state of the roads as just being the most visible proxy for the state of the environment in which people live, people who ignore this are effectively saying, I know that you think that living in a nice place is the most important thing to you, but trust us, you're wrong about that. It is this attitude that has made Labour and the Conservatives profoundly unpopular and has fuelled the rise of both Reform on the right and the Greens on the left in the UK. In the US, it is the reason that the Democrats are in such a mess. The core idea here, which is that you make progress towards a goal that people want, visible for good or bad, would solve one of the main concerns I have with AndyBurnham's promotion of devolution as the main plank of his projects to fix the problems that have blighted the UK for the last 40 plus years. Organisations, from national governments down to private companies, often fall into the trap of thinking that problems with the structure of the organisation is the only thing that is dragging the performance of both individuals in an organisation and the organisation as a whole down. They then believe that a new structure will solve all of the problems and that their whole job is to propose a new structure, impose that new structure on the organisation, and then sit back and wait for the results to flow in. A great example is education. In my lifetime in the UK, we have had grammar schools and secondary moderns, comprehensive schools, local authority schools, local management of schools, foundation schools, academies, academy clusters, and free schools. And do you know what all of education research says has the biggest effect on outcomes for students? That's right, it's good teachers. I'm not saying structures don't matter. Structures can make things worse or better. But for me, two things are much more important. Having people with the intellectual virtues needed to do the job, and a culture that lets these people do their job, with the transparency that makes sure that they are doing the job properly. If I were Burnham, I would do devolution this way. I would say, you can do what you want, any way you want, but you have to be able, one, to prove that what you want to do aligns with the people who've elected you, and two, you have to be able to show on a weekly basis that you are progressing towards the goals that you've set yourself. If you can't do that, then there should be a mechanism similar to the recall petition for MPs for you to be thrown out by the people and replaced by someone else. In order to roll out my idea of putting people in charge of achieving things that have the requisite amount of practical wisdom to achieve them, we have to have enough people to put in those positions. As I've said previously, I've worked with a handful of such people. Extrapolating from my experience, I would guess that we currently have a few hundred in the UK. In the short term, that's enough to get us started, but in the long term, we need to greatly expand the pool of people who have the amount of practical wisdom needed to do hard things. After all, once the private sector catches on, they will start offering large salaries to people who consistently demonstrate that they can get hard stuff done. In the medium term, we would need to establish an academy that would identify people with the raw capability to acquire the knowledge, skills and wisdom, and then to train them to actually be able to do it. In France, they do something similar with their management cadre. In order to get into a management role with one of the top French companies, you have to have a management degree. Not one in classics or PPE, mind. And it has to come from one of the grandes écoles, which are their equivalent of our top-tier universities. Studies have shown that this is one of the major reasons for the difference in productivity between big companies in France and in the UK. So, you may object and say, but Steve, don't you know we're broke? We can't afford to do these things. Well, my answer to that is when money is tight, it is even more important that it is spent wisely than when there's lots of it flying around. My experience from a career that has been spent roughly 50-50 in the private and public sectors is that whether an organisation is state-owned or privately owned is not the defining factor when it comes to efficiency. It's whether money is easy to come by or whether there's a struggle for profitability. I've worked for a couple of businesses where the cash flowed in easily and there was just as much nonsense going on in those businesses as there was in the most disconnected government department. Another objection you might have is that it is the bureaucracy that stifles the public sector and stops it getting things done. Again, having worked across the public and private sector, I think that objection is overdone. In my experience, it's possible to work with the grain of a bureaucracy in a way that is reasonably effective. It's certainly quicker to do that than restructuring an organisation and then trying to deliver change. I think that people who complain about bureaucracy either don't have the skills to deliver anyway and wouldn't be successful if they had no constraints, or they don't want to do the hard work of communicating their vision and objectives well enough to take people with them. They want just to be able to do what they want without having to explain what they're doing and why they're doing it. The three most difficult things I've done have all been either when I've been employed in the public sector or I've been working for public sector clients. I will say that achieving hard things in the public sector, or I guess in large private sector organisations, doesn't always make you popular. I naively thought that it would for a very long time. Ideally, for this to be successful, there would be a change in culture to value achievement more than fitting in. This doesn't mean you have to be an asshole to achieve things. In fact, being an asshole will prevent you from being successful because you have to be able to take other people with you. If such a culture change is too hard, then we will have to continue to rely on consultants for the time being. They can afford to focus on achievement without too much regard for their long-term future within the organisation. I've run a number of procurements in the public sector, and to be honest, it didn't take me any more time to do it than it would have in the private sector. The main difference in the private sector was that a lack of a consistent process meant that quite often, more often than you might expect, a contract was awarded to the company that was most effective at getting the chief exec on their side rather than the one that would do the best job. A well-known process that you have to follow makes it harder, although not impossible, for individuals to hold sway and make the wrong decision. All the above is not to say that structures are not important, or that streamlining the bureaucracy that can slow down getting stuff done wouldn't help. It's just that from my experience, these things are less of a barrier to getting stuff done than people think. As an example, let's think about planning consultations for large infrastructure projects. There seems to be a view that either we have long drawn out processes that take years or we don't have any consultation whatsoever. An improvement would be to take an approach that's similar to satisficing. That is, that we consult enough to be reasonably confident that we understand the full range of views, and then we make a decision based on that. After all, there are only 3 possible outcomes. 1, the project goes ahead unchanged. 2, the project is cancelled. And then 3, the project goes ahead with some changes based on the consultations. If you've done your job properly, you should never be in the position of having to cancel the project. You should have identified the issue before getting to the consultation stage. Realistically, option 1, that the project would require no changes, is unlikely. So the practically wise person would budget for making some changes to enable the project to go ahead. My understanding is that in the case of HS2, which is, for those of you who are not in the UK, is a new high-speed rail line that was supposed to connect London with the northern cities of England, they accepted every objection to the line, short of those who were absolutely opposed to its very existence, to the point where the cost has risen to such an extent that instead of connecting London to the cities of Manchester and Leeds via Birmingham, it is now planned to run from somewhere just outside Birmingham to somewhere just outside London. What I am saying is a better application of practical wisdom and moderation would allow us to get things done without us having to take China's approach, which is just to build things where the government decrees and let the people go hang. So what do you think about all of this? Do you think the right structures and the right policies, along with taxing the rich more and maybe borrowing a bit more too, will be enough to actually give people a sense that things might be improving in the UK? Or do you think that without a serious injection of practical wisdom, we are simply rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, and that in 2029 we'll wake up to a Reform government and a Greens opposition? I'd love to read your comments. Join me next time for a discussion of the cardinal virtue of courage.